to Bible study with reality. Today I'm beginning a Bible study in the book of Ecclesiastes. So I'll be covering chapters 1 up to 12 of the book of Ecclesiastes. So maybe you're contemplating on a book of the Bible to study. Maybe you're a new Christian and you're thinking, well, which book should I study in the Bible? Because there's so many places you can go to in the Bible. Often for new Christians, it's recommended to start in the Gospels, particularly the book of John. So that's in the New Testament. But in the Old Testament, sometimes it's recommended to start with Genesis, the beginning of things. Or Ecclesiastes is actually a good book to delve into. Why is Ecclesiastes a good book to look into? Well, Ecclesiastes presents a naturalistic view of life. It looks at life through very human eyes. It looks at life in a very practical way and explores a lot of the questions that most of us are asking. Some of the key themes it covers quite a lot of different themes, but among the themes it covers are themes such as the meaning of life. It also looks at the inevitability of death, or the transience of life, how life quickly passes by. It also looks at, as a theme, the pitfalls of power, prestige, and materialism. Another theme it covers is contentment, living a life of contentment. But I think a really important theme that the book of Ecclesiastes covers is in its closing pages, where it talks about the fear of God. And that is the whole duty of man, is to fear God and to keep his commandments. So Ecclesiastes covers quite a number of different themes. But for today, we're looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 1. And may I say, it's such a pleasure to have you as we delve into the scriptures and read the first chapter of Ecclesiastes. Today I'll be covering from verses 1 up to verse 11. It's a short chapter and it goes as far as 18 verses. But the second part is really about wisdom. So I won't go into that for today, because what the book of Ecclesiastes does is that it touches on one subject and then another subject, and it repeats some of the subjects. So at some point I'll come to wisdom. But for today, so verse 1 says, the words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. We know that the book of Ecclesiastes was written by King Solomon. King Solomon being the son of King David. There's much agreement that Solomon is the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes. And then he goes on to say in verse 2, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And so in some versions, it's the word vanity that's used. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. And what Solomon does is he looks at, as I've said, he studies and explores the different experiences of the human condition. And what sets Solomon apart is that Solomon was a man who was, not only was he king, but he was a man who had great wisdom. He had asked God for wisdom, and God had granted him much wisdom. He had the unique position of being able to experience anything and everything he wanted to do. So when he comes and he writes this, and we understand he writes this in the latter part of his life, in his declining years. When Solomon comes and he writes this, and he's now talking about vanity, vanity, all is vanity, it helps to remember that this is a man who's had a unique position in being able to experience a lot of different things. He even says at one part that he did not withhold himself from the pleasures of life, from many different experiences. So when he comes and he says meaningless, meaningless, it helps to have that understanding that this is the kind of person. It's not just any person who's coming and talking about life. It's a person who's really had a lot of experience. So verse 3 says, "What does man gain from all his labor, at which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go." So when it says, "What does man gain from all his labor, which he toils under the sun?" There's a lot of frustration that many of us can feel sometimes, because sometimes it feels like life is just work, 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 toiling, 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 going through this, going through that. And so he asks an important question. What does man gain from all his labor, at which he toils under the sun? And when reading the book of Ecclesiastes, it's a book that causes you to stop and just think. Some of the writings that recorded for us are really just to help us stop and think as well. He goes on to say, "Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever." That's verse 3. Generations come, generations go. That's pointing us to our immortality, that, all of us will be faced with death. This life that we live will not always go on. At some point, we don't know how, and it's a mystery for many of us. We do not know what the end will look like. For some, the end comes suddenly. You hear it's a car accident, somebody's been shot, absurd things. Unfortunately, there's wars in the world, all kinds of things, and a person's demise can come so suddenly. In some cases, that demise may take some time through the form of an illness, a terminal illness. But even with age, just the simple fact of aging, because none of us can run from aging. One day you're 25, next thing you know you're 36, next thing you know you're 55, next thing you know you're time moves so quickly, the transience of time. And so death can come upon us at any given time, and it's helpful for us, even though we don't always want to contemplate these things with the hope that it will give us a more focused life, a life that focuses on what really and truly matters. And so when he says generations come and generations go, aside from our mortality, I think I said immortality before. We're not immortal, we're mortal, we die. That was a mistake. But generations come, generations go points to God's immortality. God is immortal. He helps us here so that we can remember that while we are mortal beings, while we die, our lives end. God is immortal. While generations come and generations go, God lives on. I'm reminded of Psalm 90 and the first verse, where Moses says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you ever brought forth the earth, the world and the earth, or the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. That's a verse, Psalm 90 verse 1, that speaks about the immortality of God. And isn't it just good news to know that even though we are mortal beings, we have a dwelling place. We have a safe place in God. And so when Solomon talks here about generations coming and generations go, the thought does come to mind that God is eternal. Let's continue into verse 4. I've just read verse 4, verse 5. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. So when Solomon says here, the sun rises, the sun sets, hurries back to where it rises, the wind blows to the south and turns to the north, he's pointing us to the cyclical nature of life. That life is cyclical in its very nature. One day comes, the sun rises, the sun sets. Another day comes, the sun rises, the sun sets. The wind blows, it rains, it's hot. All those day-to-day experiences that we experience living under the sun. Solomon here is reminding us of the cyclical nature of life. And sometimes that causes that same feeling or thought that, well, what's the meaning of all of this? What's the point in all of this? But then again, as I said, he's getting us to think about life and to take an in-depth look into our surroundings and our very own condition. Let's continue into verse 8. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. So Solomon here says the eye, it never gets enough of seeing. It will take in the whole expanse of the sky. It will take in the next thing. It will look at the shops. It will look at a piece of paper. It will look at something you're cooking. The eye just takes in and takes in and takes in. The ear takes in all kinds of sounds. It doesn't discriminate. It takes in the movement of cars, a crying baby, the sound of television, the sound of music. The ear just takes in and takes in and takes in. And here he's giving us a sense of how it's almost as if even our very being, we just can never get enough. We just can never be satisfied. We just continue to take in and take in. And maybe we can stop and think there and have a pause. And then in verse 10, is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new. It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. So there's nothing new under the sun, as Solomon says. There's absolutely nothing new under the sun. For us, we'll see things and they may be new to us because we simply haven't seen them. It's interesting what they say even about fashion, that there's certain fashionable items that were worn in the past. And then it seems like they come back round again. To the people that are wearing those things now, or those items now, they're thinking, this is the new thing, this is the in thing. But it's actually not really new, as Solomon says. There's nothing new under the sun. As we go on to verse 14, he says, there is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. And so all through history, mankind, people have come and people have gone. Generations have come, generations have gone. They're people who've died in wars, all kinds of wars. We go back to World War II, we go even further back, conflicts that happened with the Philistines, Israelites, all kinds of conflicts. People have died in those conflicts. People have died of natural causes. And yet, many people are never actually remembered, almost as if they never existed, and yet they did. Of course, some people make it into the pages of history in one way or the other. But the truth is, you do get a sense that for the majority of people that have lived on this earth, they are never remembered. And so you start to ask the question, as Solomon is asking, vanity, vanity, isn't it all meaningless? And yet, as I end on this particular verse, it's very important as you read the book of Ecclesiastes. Of course, we're only in chapter 1, but in the closing chapter of Ecclesiastes, it does talk about the conclusion. After Solomon has done all his exploring of the meaning of life, the human condition, after he's done all that exploring, he does reach a conclusion. Though, yes, the book starts with vanity of vanities, meaningless. That's how Solomon begins this book. But when he ends the book, he ends it with a conclusion. And his conclusion is, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And so it's really important to remember that as you read the book of Ecclesiastes, there's a lot of despair along the way. There's a lot of sadness that comes. There's a lot of moments for skepticism. There's a lot of moments for doubts, and there's a lot of moments where you'd want to throw in the towel as you read the book of Ecclesiastes. But it's not all dim, because if you understand the conclusion that Solomon brings, fear God and keep his commandments, what Solomon is saying is that yes, life can be vain. You can live your life in vain. If you live a life that's removed from God, a life that's without God at the center and focus of all things for you, if you live that kind of life, then your life will be in vain. We know that Jesus was sent to die for our sins so that we could become the righteousness of God. And so life removed from the cross, life removed from Calvary, from what God did for us through his son Jesus, will be vain. But life in Christ will not be in vain. So for today, we'll end the study on Ecclesiastes right there in verse 11. I'd encourage you to keep reading the book of Ecclesiastes for yourself. There's so much that you can learn from the book of Ecclesiastes. It stirs up the soul. It makes you think of a lot of things. And so it's a really good place to delve into the Bible. See you next time.